So the title of this presentation is Surviving the Crisis, a Socioeconomic Assessment of Middle Class in Kabul. So it's co-authored with Dr. Omar Jouya, who is in France, in Sorbonne University at the moment. The study was funded by Afghanistan Research Initiative, which is part of the Graduate School of Development in University of Central Asia, which is also linked to Aga Khan Foundation. So that's the study. Okay, my next button doesn't work. So yes, it's working now. So to just give you a little bit of context, I'm pretty sure everybody knows this context, but just to refresh your minds, prior to 2021 collapse, I'm an economist by profession, so slightly removed from the earlier discussions in the morning. The economy of Afghanistan prior to 2021 had two periods, if you like. The first decade, which runs all the way to 2010, and then the second decade from 2010, roughly 2012 to 2021. That's post-political crisis, that was the presidential election crisis, and there was a security transition when essentially all the foreign troops had withdrawn from Afghanistan down to maybe 6,000 in total. That's down from 130,000 or a maximum of 130,000. So the economy had felt that already, so growth was really weak. Then you had COVID-19 and a whole lot of other things going on in 2019 and 18 and 20. So all of that had made the situation a lot worse. So with August of 2021 and the political collapse, there was this deep and fundamental institutional change that shocked this already weakened and struggling economy even further. That's at a macro level. So you can find a whole lot of data and statistics on Afghanistan and everywhere, from various UN agencies to the big bad guys like World Bank, which I also worked with, and IMF and so on. So, for example, the total value of the economy in Afghanistan shrunk by about 5 billion or more than 5 billion overnight. This is after the collapse. So majority of those things that vanished and disappeared was concentrated in the urban areas. So Kabul City and then Kandahar and Mazar Sharif and the rest of the zones. This study kind of came up as a result of this kind of theoretical question that historically in Afghanistan, rural areas have their own means of adaptability and resilience to various types of shocks. This could be from household to co-insurance to small level lending, borrowing, and various different mechanisms to kind of smooth and ride out the shocks that happen, whether they are drought, whether they're economic shocks, and so on. So local Afghanistan has this organic mechanism, insurance mechanism within it. Although with the 20 years of intervention since 2001, some aid dependency kind of penetrated and reached rural Afghanistan, but not a lot. However, in the cities and urban centers and pockets, it's a very different story. You have this urban pockets, predominantly Kabul and the rest of the cities like Herat and Mazar Sharif and so on, who are emerging as an infant kind of hotbed of all sorts of mixtures, and their economy and their income depends on work, predominantly labor income, which is not the case in the rest of Afghanistan, as we heard throughout history that hasn't been the case in Afghanistan, whereas since 2021 that labor income became the most dominant thing in these urban cities. So the question was that with the collapse, what happened to this kind of fledgling middle class that was emerging in city centers? The question was that the shock must be much more amplified, much higher, and must have felt much deeper in the city centers and the urban areas compared to rural areas, because they already had their own organic coexistent and co-insurance and insurance mechanisms. So that was the kind of background of it. So we began the survey and the interviews. This is done all in 2023, and this is a primary survey carried out, which I will tell you guys the details in a bit. So the basic questions that we began with was what happened to employment, consumption, saving patterns, coping strategies, health, including general and mental health, perceptions of basic freedoms, and perceptions towards migration, towards things like cooperation, social stigma of losing your job, and a couple of other things. So we just wanted to do a survey and get an understanding of this using some primary data. So this was carried out in May and July of 2023. We hired 3 female surveyors and 3 male surveyors in Kabul City, and because of the security and political sensitivities and so on, you cannot do random sampling in Afghanistan. This is a hard-to-reach population, if you like. We ended up using a technique called snowball technique, which means that the person you're interviewing recruits the next 2 participants. So your first participant recruits the next 2, and then each participant recruits the next 1 or 2 they introduce you through. So our surveyors started like this and ended up with 320 or 30 people, I guess. There are all sorts of challenges when you're doing this type of survey, from the very basics of, whether you should have a record of things, how do you destroy it if somebody catches you. There are all sorts of misconceptions that can arise, if you're caught with a whole bunch of data that you're going around and asking people how they felt and how is their economic situation. So we had to take a huge number of measures, basically. And also designing the survey was slightly difficult, so we had to make sure that we were asking the right questions and getting the right type of information, because there's a lot of difficulty in recalling things that happened 2 years ago. So with all of those challenges and caveats, we did this survey. Just to give you an overall preview or overview of, or like a sneak peek into who we surveyed. If you can consider a profile of, we were concentrating on the middle class, so educated middle class who grow up and lived in center cities, in this case Kabul alone. So most of the people that we surveyed were working age population, between 25 to 44. We surveyed over 60 women, and the rest were males. Most of them had bachelors, over 50%. Some had PhDs, some had masters. Most had higher education or high school education at least. They had at least 5, 6, 7 years of work experience. So that was a good indication that we were targeting we were asking the right group of people with the kind of research objectives that we set out. The rest of the presentation is designed to give you each module. So we asked about 120 questions, and we interviewed about 25 of these people with the participants, more in-depth interview of a 2-hour-long interview. So the rest of my presentation is to just give you an overview of the findings, and I will rush through them for the sake of time. So take unemployment. From the participants, 43% of them said they were unemployed, compared to 4% in July 2021. So what we do is we're comparing what happened to this group of people in July of 2023 compared to July of 2021, which is 1 month before the collapse, right? So there's more data, there's a lot of data in there, so I will just give you the headlines. 43% of them identified as unemployed. Household income, that's the share of households earning on a monthly. So one headline you can get from this is that the share of households in our sample who were earning less than 25,000 Afghanis increased to 60%. So you have various categories within our participants, and the share of those who were earning less than 25,000 Afghanis, that's something around $400 or equivalent. It was 24%. Then it went up to 84% after the collapse. Debt, household debt, increased between the same periods, so July 2021 to July 2023. From 30%, it increased to 67%. That's almost double the amount. You can look at the rest of the details, and all of the study is actually available on Biruni Institute's website, and that can be accessed. Consumption. Here the question was a bit difficult, so we had to phrase it in a way that people were able to compare it to 2 years ago. You cannot ask them about a specific figure, asking, so how much is your consumption right now? So somebody would say, on a monthly basis it's $200, and then how much was it 2 years ago? Obviously they don't remember. But then you can compare it, things like, did it increase substantially? Did it reduce substantially? So you can do like a qualitative type. So spending on food and non-food items substantially decreased over the past 2 years. And that's what the study showed. On consumption, again, participants found it increasingly more difficult to meet their monthly expenses on food necessities. The other module of this, the questions on banking, for example, trust in banking sector. A large number of people took their money out of the banking sector, and they said they wouldn't deposit their savings in commercial banks. So if you're looking at the figure, there 45% in July of 2021 said they kept 45% of their income in the bank, whereas 2 years later, 96% said they would not. So. Since we were covering a huge array of kind of questions and different modules within the survey, so on health, a question on general health, something about 35% of the sample say that they have developed a new anxiety, or they have started taking sleeping pills since August of 2021. And there is a variation between male and female there as well. On mental health, we used this measure, K10, clinical interpretation of a K10 measure. So there is a measure that psychiatrists and psychologists use to measure various traits, that including things like how you're feeling, so worthless, sad, etc., and then clinically you translate that into 3 categories. So when you ask a group of 300 people, and then you take everyone's results, and then you categorize it into 3 categories, you can assess them, saying that this person is okay, this person does not need any referral, whereas the other person may get benefits from being referred to further psychological evaluations. And the last category being that this person must be referred for further evaluation and support. In our sample, we found that 41% needed they were in the category that must be referred. And another 34% were in the category that could be referred and could need or benefit from further psychological support and mental health support. Then we asked 5 questions about basic freedoms. The definition of basic freedom or perception of basic freedom is a very contentious issue. You have a choice, which questions do you pick? So we picked 5 and debated which one to pick. Just one other question from earlier on. So we asked these participants if their house was searched by the Taliban Authority over the last 2 years. 88% of them said between 2 to 4 times, with 9% saying never. We asked them, would you resolve, related to basic freedoms or rights, we asked them, would you resolve your disputes in Taliban courts? About 71% of them said no. Freedom to express religious or political views, about 85% of them said they cannot express their religious or political views freely. In the main study and the report itself, there's a whole bunch of other indicators. I've only picked a couple of them here. Results of the interviews. We asked, what was the general experience like? So after 2 years or 2.5 years of living under the Taliban, how do you feel? The most, if you do a word cloud and then see what was the most number of the most frequent words and themes that emerged, people said deep sense of loss, disillusionment, lack of economic and political optimism, no personal safety. I think on the question of safety, the personal safety side of it was very, very dominant. Although there is the headline you always get under the Taliban that there is no fighting in Afghanistan right now. The whole country is safe. I mean, obviously, you guys were doing the fighting, so it's safe. You're not fighting anymore. But personally, how people are feeling safe inside the country or inside their homes. A lot of them said they're not feeling great. There was shifting public discourse towards Talibanism. People were becoming, they said they felt that people are becoming less tolerant. I think I'm in my last two slides. Segregation in public spaces were more obvious and apparent. Strict societal rules were being put in place because the demographic of Kabul was being changed slowly and gradually. The other theme was migration. About 85% of respondents said, given the chance, they would leave the country. And we asked them why. Why do you want to leave? Fear of being prosecuted, personal safety, uncertainty about daughters' future and education, loss of individual freedoms, racial and language-based discrimination, lack of economic opportunities, fear of civil war, and some other factors. I have some quotes from some of the participants that I will skip for the sake of time. We asked them, how do you perceive cooperation, or what do you think has happened to cooperation? You know, theoretically, there's a discussion between inter-group and intra-group cooperation that changes in the face of various political dynamics. So a lot of people said they perceived that dividing/uniting dimensions were the following. So ethnicity, language, sex, income distribution, neighborhood, and social status. I think these are the usual suspects anyway within this literature as well. That if you are from the same ethnicity, you feel closer to your friends and to people within, or if you are from the same social status from the previous government, you have more in common, so you stick together and you talk to each other more often. They said they started talking to a lot of people. That was a coping mechanism where they started talking to each other after the collapse. Social stigma, I think this was to do with loss of job and losing their jobs. So they had two dimensions, socially and also personally. There was an influx of new arrivals from the Taliban heartland. That had marginalized a lot of these middle-class people who got used to the idea of living in Kabul. Things like social norms and etiquettes had changed. City culture was very different. Isolation, self-low esteem, lack of socializing, verbal or even physical abuse for being too liberal or open-minded, and things like that. They said these things started emerging, and they can see them in their everyday life. Right. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That was very nice.